think that's...
We aren't live yet.
I think I just clicked on it, so...
Okay. And we're live.
All right, then. Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to another episode of 2K Weekly, where we go over the scores of 2K Universe each week. We are now in Week 8, which means we have just reached the halfway point of the 2K schedule. I'm actually ahead on this slide. It's actually Week 7, but welcome regardless. Here are our top stories today. The game we saw last night, hope you enjoyed it. This UConn-Rutgers. UConn now advancing to a 7-0 record after beating the Rutgers Scarlet Knights 35-14. We had a lot of overtime games this weekend. 5 total with 2 or more overtimes. Arkansas State, Brown, UCF, Sam Houston State, and Cornell being the benefactors of those games. Number 6, Michigan, winning a big rivalry over their hated adversary, Michigan State. They take home the Paul Bunyan Trophy. Georgia Tech beating Florida to lock themselves firmly into first place in the SEC East. Their biggest tests come later with Tennessee and Georgia near the end of their schedule. Speaking of, Tennessee beats an Alabama team who looked poised for the top 25 on the third Saturday in October. They take the SEC East. They take a big step in the SEC East. Ohio State, now the top team in the Big Ten leaders, taking a win over the Indiana Hoosiers. Victory bell goes to Nebraska in a shootout with rival Missouri. Air Force wins its first Commander-in-Chief trophy since 2013, clinching it against Army. They also beat Navy earlier this year. That'll mean that Army-Navy game will be for nothing more than pride, unfortunately, for those teams. How about Wichita State taking an upset win over South Dakota to become the number 1 team in the Missouri Valley's South Division? And an out of this world game in 4 overtimes, UCF beats the Houston Cougars in the space race. Danny, what's your big story here?
Yeah, my biggest one will be UCF against Houston. I mean, this right here was a big game for both of them, and now I'm sure UCF fans are already clicking their ticket to Birmingham for the conference championship.
They take a firm stance in the SEC, or the Conference USA East. Let's head out to the Big East to start us off. The Pittsburgh-Syracuse football rivalry. The Syracuse Orange broke into the top 25 to start this week, and they'll leave with a win on the road at Heinz Field over Pittsburgh. They advanced to 5-1. George Jones ran for 122 yards and a touchdown. Matt Taylor was 15 for 22 with 203 yards and 2 TDs. Johnny Means had 4 receptions, 68 yards, and a TD. Pierre Scott for Pittsburgh had 87 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Ryan Whitlock was 19 for 29, had 233 yards and a TD. And fullback Tony Nichols had 25 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Big win for Syracuse to stay in the Big East race, Danny.
Yeah, that Syracuse, they really have a lot to look forward to, especially with UConn coming up later on. But this was a pretty good stance in for Pitts. This must be quite disappointing for them, especially when it's homecoming week for them.
Pittsburgh's homecoming. We'll head over to Colorado Springs for Air Force Army, the third link of the Commander-in-Chief trophy. Of course, the others being the Air Force's game against Navy, and of course the Army-Navy game. Air Force hadn't won a Commander-in-Chief's trophy since the 2013 season. And the Falcons slipped through and managed to get a 27-24 win to take the rivalry over the favored Black Knights. Jeremy Cooley for the Black Knights was 23 for 99 and a TD. Trey Dixon was 7 for 16, 89 yards and a TD. And Army's streak was unfortunately broken. They had won the last 5 Commander-in-Chief's trophies dating back to their 11-1 season in 2017. As for Air Force, Jace Shaw was 10 for 13 with 207 passing yards to his name. David Simpson had 14 rushing attempts for 101 yards and a TD. And as we mentioned, the first time that the Falcons had won the Commander-in-Chief's trophy since 2013. This shouldn't be too much of a roadblock for Army, as they have a much easier schedule coming ahead for them, though this will definitely put a damper on their BCS Buster opportunities. Danny?
Yeah, that for Army, this is really disappointing because they were trying to compete to keep the trophy, but Air Force already undefeated against the other military academies, but they still have a chance to beat against Navy later this year.
No matter if this trophy's up for grabs or not, Army Navy is always a great game. That'll be a focus that we'll head to. Let's head to East Lansing for a rivalry I grew up in, the Paul Bunyan's Trophy. When you grow up around here, you're either Michigan or Michigan State, and even more so than Michigan Ohio State. When you're younger, this is the big rivalry that always matters. This one was out in Spartan Stadium. Michigan State busted out the neon green for this one, I see. The Spartans performing surprisingly well for being only 4-2 entering this one with a 1-1 conference record. They would end up falling, though, to the number 6 Wolverines, 26-23, the final. Jeremy Hall was 31 for 147 yards and a 49-yard touchdown. Quarterback Justin Gant had 14 for 28 with 136 yards and a TD, and Brett Mansfield, the wideout, had 3 receptions for 45 yards and a touchdown. For State, Roosevelt Wheeler was 25 for 42, 295 yards, and 2 TDs. Jerome Fisher had 31 yards on the ground, and Randall Mason had 60 yards and a TD as Michigan takes home Paul Bunyan's Trophy, Danny.
Yeah, that even though this was a loss for Michigan State, you can still say this was a confident loss considering that the only team who had a better showing than this was Notre Dame, who beat them. So a pretty good showing for their homecoming game.
Definitely. The last time Michigan State has beaten Michigan in this rivalry, that was 2015. Let's head over to Chapel Hill, the Kenan Memorial Stadium. North Carolina coming in number 17 against the trap team to end all trap teams, being Dave's show. The Truckers would fall, however, 37-23 the final. Running back Brandon Smith for Dave's show was 22 for 63 with a touchdown. Micah Campanella was 19 for 27, had 280 yards and 2 TDs. And the wideout was 3 receptions for 69 yards and a touchdown. Matt Robinson for the Tar Heels was 23 for 173 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Charlie Malone was 16 for 27, 223 passing yards. And Jake Wilson had 3 sacks on the Tar Heel line. Big game for North Carolina, trying to pick up their image after a bunch of close calls to begin the year and a tough loss a few weeks ago, Danny.
Yeah, then North Carolina, they really needed to have a big show in the game, especially next week when they're playing against Clemson. And for Dave's show, the rolling keeps on happening for them. This is like their 3rd game they lost straight, I believe.
I believe they have lost 3 straight.
I'll just pull it up. Yep, 3 straight.
Dave Show's next opponent, not any easier. It's UCF.
Nope, next is Bethune-Cookman and UCF.
Yeah, they do have Bethune-Cookman, so it does get easier, but then they also have to watch out for UCF. Still haven't played USF as well. And you have both Florida and Florida State to end the year. Let's head over to Houston from Chapel Hill. That score doesn't tell the whole picture. 68-60, the final score. UCF has won 4 straight, including all 4 being conference games. Houston falls to 3-3 and 1-1 in conference. This game went to 4 overtimes. We call it a space race. It was a space battle of attrition. Jack Gomez was 35 for 48, 490 yards, throwing 6 touchdowns. Aaron Herron had 9 receptions for 63 yards and 3 TDs. For Houston, Vincent Spence was 29 for 46, 391 yards, 5 touchdowns and a pick. That pick we'll get to. Houston's defense had 4 sacks and 2 forced fumbles, and running back Hunter Johnson had 13 attempts for 110 yards, 2 touchdowns, the longest being a 63-yarder. And what a finish this one had. Houston set up inside UCF territory to try and see, after UCF's drive had stalled, to try and take the game, but it was stolen from them. Tom Sanders, 96-yard pick 6 to end the game in overtime. In overtime number 4, mind you. This is a statement win for UCF and likely will send them to the Conference USA title game when all is said and done, Danny.
Yeah, for Houston, this is another big stumble for them as they were expected to be the winner of the West and they stumbled. For UCF, they have so much momentum right now, and even though they're going into a bye week next week, that they're preparing for their Space U game against Dave Show.
Yeah, we'll see that. Let's head to Columbus, Ohio Stadium, the Shoe. Ohio State taking down the Indiana Hoosiers, who are number 8 going into this game. The Hoosiers fall to 5-3. The Buckeyes jump up to 5-2. They're still unbeaten in conference. 21-14, the final score here. Tex Hodges, 27 for 41, 289 yards. He had a pick, though, instead of any touchdown. John Harris was 27 for 116 yards and a touchdown, and Indy's defense had 3 sacks and a pick. A big loss for the Buckeyes, though, was Tim Stovall. He'll be out with a hand injury until Week 11 when they play Penn State. Starting for them will be coming in for them was Paul Ferwerda, who's 13 for 21, 189 yards, and 2 TDs. So there might be a bit of controversy brewing even when Stovall comes back. Patrick Gold was 3 catches for 58 yards and a touchdown as well. Those TDs led the Buckeyes to this big win to put them on top of the Big Ten leaders division, Danny.
Yeah, that for Ohio State, they initially started the season 0-2, and they were looking very down. And here they are, storming back, winning every single game they played. And for Indiana, it's another fumble for them, and I don't know if they can
keep it up.
Keep up a lot of this momentum, especially next week when they play against Notre Dame.
They got to take on the Fighting Irish, who are poised to most likely represent the Legends as long as they don't slip up, and Michigan would end up taking their spot. Let's head to the Victory Bell battle in Columbia. The Missouri Tigers also off to a bit of a rough start. They take on Nebraska, hoping to right the ship. Another team that had a rocky beginning. They've lost 2 conference games to both of the Kansas schools, but this week they are able to keep things on the right track. 47-41 the final in this high-scoring close game. Matt Woods for the Huskers was 21 for 35, 323 yards and a touchdown. Running back Greg Chavez had 22 attempts for 182 yards and 2 TDs, including a 58-yarder, 3 sacks and a pick for the Nebraska defense. Nick Williams was 15 for 26, 214 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick. Running back Nate Salazar had 2 touchdowns off of 193 yards, including a 48-yarder. And Andrew Johnson with 6 receptions for 83 yards and a TD. Valiant effort for the Tigers, but Nebraska starting to look more and more legit, even with a very rough start, Danny.
Yeah, that for Missouri, this is another rough start. First, that Illinois loss, and then several losses later, and now to Nebraska. And for Nebraska, this is like their big hope of trying to get back into the Big 12 race.
They currently are sitting, I believe, 3rd in the Big 12 North division. I believe behind Colorado and Kansas State. But the Huskers are making a push to try and take that division. Those 2 losses to start are not going to help them out. But if they can manage some upsets here and there, they may be right and ready to take the Big 12 North and maybe even the conference if they manage some magic. How about we head out to Knoxville, Tennessee? The 3rd Saturday in October every year, Alabama plays Tennessee, and this year's no different. Tennessee breaking out the Smoky Mountains alternates, rocking the gray, and it was a good luck charm for them. 41-38 the final of the Volunteers. They were ranked earlier this year. They dropped out after some tough losses, but they managed to move up to 4-2, now 1-1 in conference. Bama falls to 5-2, 2-1. Chris Horn was 25 for 38, 248 yards, and 4 TDs for the Crimson Tide. They lost Horn as well. He'll be out 3 weeks with an ankle injury. He'll be back week 11 to take on Mississippi State. Alabama does have a bye in that time. Tony Smith, the running back, had a touchdown off of 49 yards, but it was all Rocky Top in terms of offense. William Bowling was 21 for 176 yards and 3 touchdowns. Fullback Sam Taylor had 2 touchdowns off 37 yards, and Jermaine Alvarez was 17 for 28, 243 yards. No touchdowns, though. He would end up having 2 picks of his own. But on this very special day in the SEC, it's the Volunteers who managed to take a big step. Danny?
Yeah, that for Tennessee, this was a really, really, really big game for them. I mean, when you're playing against one of your biggest rivals, it's always going to be a tough competition, and this one proved to be another shootout.
Mm-hmm. As we'll move on from Knoxville to Moscow. Not traveling across the world, though. We're heading up to Idaho. The Kibbe Dome. Number 20 New Mexico State. Still dealing with the repercussions of that loss to Nevada. But they advanced to 6-1 with a 57-24 win over the Idaho Vandals, who were no slouch. They were 5-1 entering this game, just like the Aggies. However, it was all Aggies all day. Mike Roberts had 3 touchdowns on the ground off 15 attempts and 105 yards. Dwayne Stallings was 20 for 23, automatic, 269 yards and 4 touchdowns. Ross Pearson, the linebacker, had a sack and a pick. Andre Smith for Idaho was 18 for 32, 237 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick. Tom Brock had 2 receptions, 51 yards and a TD. But the big issue for Idaho, they got to get their discipline in check. They had 9 flags for 71 total yards. That definitely didn't help them in easing up that deficit they ended up falling into. A lot of free points given to the other team. New Mexico State now in the driver's seat in the Mountain Division, or the Wax Mountain Division, pardon me. Danny, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for Idaho, they still have a lot to look forward to this season. So when we're winning, they go bowling. And for New Mexico State, they still got to hope that they could beat the rest of their competition. Maybe we get revenge against Nevada in the championship game.
Yeah. Let's take a look at the total games here. Your Youngstown State putting up a good effort. Not enough to beat Miami, Ohio here on Wednesday. Hey, I'm not feeling great on the Redhawks here, though. I think they may have some trouble going down the schedule. Also, close call for Ohio, almost losing to Long Island, 10-7 the final there. To Thursday, Wichita State, now the number 1 team in the Missouri Valley West Division, or South Division. It is the West Division, pardon me. They take a big win over the South Dakota Coyotes, the reigning Missouri Valley champions. 34-16 the final there. On Friday, Nichols State, not even close. Stephen F. Austin advances to another win. They're still unbeaten entering Week 8. And Troy gives the North Texas Mean Green a scare. But North Texas is firmly still leading that division. Danny, any thoughts on weekday games?
Yeah, I think the big one for me was San Jose State against Pacific, because this was another game that will decide who will be like second place within the Pacific Division, but it was still a very fun match at least, by 3 points, scoring over 70 points,
Mm-hmm. We're going to head to all of our games. Number 12, Illinois, winning 16-7 on the road over Penn State. Southern Miss still unbeaten. Another big win over the UAB Blazers. Virginia Tech on the road. Close call over South Carolina. Nebraska Omaha upsetting the previous number 1 team in the Missouri Valley, Northern Iowa. Northern Iowa, though, still firmly in charge of that division. Georgia Southern, close win over Furman. They're on top of their division as well. Tennessee State and Arkansas State go to 3 overtimes. And the Red Wolves avoid an FCS upset, 15-12. And in 2 overtimes, Harvard and Brown, Ivy League rivals, squaring off with each other. The Brown Bears get the upset win at home. Any games in the first column?
Yeah, for me, the game that I would really keep my eye on more so is Auburn. Winning 12-0 against Tulane. Was pretty good over the season, so to see them win like this, it's pretty impressive.
We'll move on to the second column. Notre Dame 48-0 on the road over Purdue. App State has a scare against Colgate 48-41. Sam Houston State in 3 overtimes. Still having to deal with that loss to Texas Arlington. The Bearcats survive Southeast Louisiana 69-63, the highest scoring game we saw all weekend. And Texas putting up a good effort, more so than ever, but Oklahoma State wins 52-45 over the number 25 Longhorns. And Rice blowing out Arkansas. The Razorbacks are still without a win, and they're very far into Conference USA play here. Another rivalry game in the Ivy League, Yale falling at home to Cornell in 2 overtimes. Georgia Tech 34-17. Cruise control over the Florida Gators. And number 11 Baylor, a little close, but they managed to escape Lubbock with a win over the Red Raiders 31-24. Danny, any other games you want to highlight?
SMU 51, Louisville 3. How is this possible, Louisville? They were projected to be potentially a national championship contender, and here they are losing by over 45 points. It's like, how is this possible for you, Louisville?
I don't know. And SMU is not even the best team in that division. We'll wrap things up here with a couple games in the Pacific time slots. Stanford, comfortable win over Washington. Even more so for Boise State, though Montana managed to put up a surprising amount of points against the Broncos. Nevada entering El Paso. They escaped the Sun Bowl with a 6-point win over UTEP to remain unbeaten. TCU 61-7. Blowout win over Eastern Washington to put the Eagles well past the negative 100 point mark. Negative 200 point mark. Oregon will be the last game we highlight here. 22-10, they take down Arizona on the road. Also Hawaii getting a blowout win over CSU Fullerton. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, for me, my big game that I was looking at here is Wyoming, because Utah is still struggling a lot, and now Wyoming is proving to be a contender in the Mountain West.
I think up next we'll be talking about the race to the conference championship. Before we do that, the 2K universe, we're gonna plug the Tumblr, tumblr.com/2Kuniverse. Follow for some exclusive updates and bonus content. The MLB playoffs are still in the works. Keep an eye on that. We'll have some updates for you soon enough. But now we're going to head to the race to the conference championship, as that picture shows Georgia Tech, who are easily on top of their division. And let's head to the start here. The ACC. Right now, the top teams, Florida State, Virginia Tech, and UNC, are very much familiar with. Clemson slipping in at 2-1. South Carolina just below them as well. The current favorites right now are going to be Florida State and Virginia Tech. Danny?
Yeah, Florida State, Virginia Tech are the shoo-ins right now, especially how Florida State beat North Carolina, so they're kind of a little bit out the way of contention, so it'll be good to see Florida State, Virginia Tech playing again.
The Big East North may or may not have been decided this week, as UConn beat Rutgers to move on to 7-0 on the year. UMass is 5-1. They're sitting at second. Both are unbeaten in conference. Also, Syracuse right behind them in third. For the Big East South, Temple comfortably in the lead. Villanova has won a lot recently to slip into second place. I think the current favorites right now in the Big East are going to be UConn and Temple. Danny?
Yeah, UConn Temple are the shoo-ins unless Temple decides to drop like several games, which, seeing how the South is looking like, it is very much possible for them to be dropping games. So you'll have to see about the South.
Moving on to the Big Ten, Notre Dame and Michigan, the top two. We've been expecting this ever since Notre Dame started climbing up the rankings when they beat Michigan. They're sitting at 5-1, 3-0 in conference. Michigan is second in the division. I would also point your attention to a slipping Northwestern, but right now it's a two-horse race there. I think the Fighting Irish are your leaders right now, Danny.
Yeah, for me, Notre Dame is probably going to be the number one team in the legend now.
As we move on to the leaders, Ohio State is 3-0. They're sitting at 5-2 though. Illinois has a chance to prove this week that they are likely going to be a shoo-in to win the Big Ten if they can beat Michigan. That's the big test that they have next week. They're at 6-0. They advance to 7-0, hand Michigan their second loss. Then they face Ohio State. They'll be an easy favorite, and maybe even in the national championship contention. I'm picking Illinois to win the leaders division and take on Notre Dame. Danny?
Yeah, for me, it's got to be Ohio State's going to take it. I mean, unless Illinois performs extremely well, which they haven't, but for me, I think it's going to be Ohio State.
We'll move on to the Big 12. The Big 12 North, Colorado, currently on top. I don't think they're 23-0 in conference. They're 3-0. Kansas State is 2-1. Nebraska right behind them. And also Missouri, not entirely out. They would need a miracle, but they are still technically in the picture. The South is Oklahoma State by far. Baylor is 6-1 though. Oh, they would need the Cowboys to lose twice in order to take the division. Not to mention that the Bears would need to win out, which is easier said than done, especially when you have potential spoiler Oklahoma still on the schedule. I'm picking the Cowboys and the Buffaloes to square off in the conference title. Danny?
Yeah, for me, in the South, it's definitely going to be Oklahoma State, but in the North, I think maybe Kansas State might have a chance of pulling it off.
Let's head to the Conference USA right now. In spite of their lackluster overall record, UCF has won 4 straight. They're 4-3 on the year. They have a pretty solid chance of winning out. Now, the UCF Knights may or may not be able to save their season when all is said and done. I think the Knights will by far take the Conference USA East. As for the West, it's still the two-horse race of Southern Miss and Memphis. I'm picking the Tigers to win when these two match up later on in the year. Danny?
Yeah, for the North, it's definitely going to be UCF, but for the South, will have to agree with you that Memphis might be the better team, but it's going to be close. But the game is at Memphis later on.
We'll jump over the Independents as well as the Ivy League. Currently, Dartmouth, Brown, Cornell, and Penn are sitting at the top with 1-0, but we'll head on to the MAC. Miami, Ohio, by far on top of the division, but I'm not going to pick them to win the MAC East. I'm picking Ohio. I'm not that convinced in this team. They haven't really done a lot to impress me here. As for the MAC West, currently knotted up between Northern Illinois and Central Michigan. NIU about to break that regular season winning streak record next week against Ball State. But Central Michigan may be the one to snap this streak. I think the Chippewas are a scary good team in the MAC. Danny?
Yeah, for the MAC, it's got to be North Illinois, and for the East, I'm still high on Miami. They still are performing the best.
We're going to head next screen, Missouri Valley. Now Southern Illinois is on top of the division. I think Northern Iowa by far is the best team here, though. The Missouri Valley West, Wichita State takes the lead over South Dakota, but I don't think either of those teams are winning. I'm going to pick South Dakota State, who have looked really good in their recent games. They're 2-1 in conference. They have a date later this year with the Shockers. Danny?
Yeah, for the West, I'm going to pick Wichita State because they have performed the best, including beating South Dakota. And for the East, it's definitely going to be Northern Iowa, despite them slipping this week. Still think they're going to win out.
As for the Mountain West, BYU still on top, tied with Wyoming. Wyoming has the better overall at 5-2. I'm picking the Cowboys to take the division, and I could see them rallying late to finish the season somewhat strong. As for the West Division, the two-horse race of Boise State and TCU, it's really whoever can win that matchup coming up. I'm going to pick the Broncos to win the matchup, win the conference, and play in the national championship game. Danny?
Yeah, for me, for the Mountain West, I believe it's going to be BYU against Boise. That rivalry game is going to continue on, and that's going to be a big championship game in Denver, Colorado.
In the Pac-10, Oregon and Stanford are on top, undefeated in conference. USC and Arizona State both have one loss in conference play. Surprising to me, I didn't think that they were both still this high up. Specifically Arizona State. I'm going to pick Oregon and Stanford. The winner of that game will play USC. I think that the Stanford Cardinal will get a rematch with I think the Stanford Cardinal and the USC Trojans will play twice. Danny?
Yeah, for me, I'm going to pick Oregon as a definite shoo-in, but I'm going to pick USC to potentially win it against Stanford.
Oregon played USC earlier on in the year. Stanford still has to play the Ducks and the Trojans. We'll see how that pans out. The SEC East, currently Georgia Tech's division 6-0, 2-0 overall. Georgia is 3-0 in conference. They have one more win to edge them out. But I think the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets will cruise their way to maybe an unbeaten season, entering the SEC championship game. The SEC West right now firmly is in the hands of the LSU Tigers, unless Alabama can pull off an upset. I'm picking the Tigers and the Yellow Jackets to play in the conference title game. Danny?
Yeah, same here with LSU, Georgia Tech. These seem like the best ones, but they are going to play against each other later, so that's going to give us a little sneak preview into it.
The SoCon North, William and Mary is 4-0 in conference. They've won 4 straight. Very similar to UCF right now. App State is second. They're 5-1, 2-1. I'm going to be bold and pick the William and Mary tribe to take the SoCon North. The South, though, is firmly a Georgia Southern win right now. Danny?
Yeah, for me, I still have hope in App State to continue on, and maybe Georgia Southern can win out of the South Division.
We'll move on to the Southland East. Lamar currently sitting on top of the East 3-3. They're 2-0 in conference. McNeese has the better record overall, though. They're 5-3, 2-1. I'm going to pick the Cowboys taking the Southland East. The Southland West is currently Stephen F. Austin's. They play Sam Houston State later on in the year. That's their biggest test that hasn't happened yet. I'm picking the Lumberjacks to win this division and the conference. Danny?
Yeah, for me for the Southland, I think it's going to be Lamar, Stephen F. Austin, because those guys seem like the best teams in their conference, and I do have some hope for them.
We move on to the Sun Belt East. Georgia State currently 3-0 in their conference. They're 5-1. Coastal Carolina is 6-0. Oh, I'm gonna pick neither of these teams actually. I think that both these teams end up slipping. I pick FAU to take the East. The West right now is sealed for North Texas unless something happens. I'm picking North Texas to take on the FAU Owls. Danny?
I'm going to pick Coastal Carolina and North Texas. Coastal Carolina, they do have themselves a very, very good record, still being undefeated, 6-0. And I believe that later, they already beat against West Kentucky, and just so I can make sure, they are playing against Coastal Carolina in Week 10, so that's going to be a big matchup for them.
We'll head on to the WAC. Nevada and New Mexico State are both ranked. Both look like some of the best teams outside of the power conferences. I think the Aggies and the Wolfpack are shoo-ins for their respective divisions. The Hawaii may be creeping up on the Wolfpack. Danny?
Yeah, for me, it's gonna be Nevada and New Mexico State. It shouldn't really be too big of a competition.
We'll have to see if that boils down. Does Nevada have the recipe to beat the Aggies a second time? As we're going to look at the current teams who are bowl-bound. Georgetown joining the fray this week are several teams. Right now we have Baylor, Boise State, Central, Coastal, UConn, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Georgia Southern, and Illinois. In yellow, you see here are the teams joining North Carolina, Miami, Ohio, Michigan, Nevada, Oklahoma State, Oregon, Sam Houston State, TCU, and Vatech join the ranks. Danny, anyone big here?
Yeah, for me, the big teams here is going to be Boise State. They are 7-0, and all the teams in yellow are those who did just become bowl eligibility, but there's going to be a lot of other teams who are knocking right outside, which we're going to see very, very soon.
Mm-hmm. Let's head to our teams knocking outside. This is new. Alabama, App State, Auburn, Arizona State, Colorado, Eastern Michigan, Florida State, Georgia State, Hawaii, Idaho, Indiana, UMass, McNeese State, Nebraska, North Texas, Northwestern, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Ohio State, SMU, Stanford, Syracuse, USC, Texas Arlington, Texas State, Wichita State, and Wyoming can join this week with a win. Who's the most likely here, do you think, to take wins, Danny?
Yeah, for me, the team here who is most likely would probably. It's going to be a tough one, but I think it's going to be either Notre Dame or Ohio State, because these guys have some pretty good games coming up.
All right, well, let's take a look at our top 25 now. A little bit of shake-up this week, especially on the lower half of the top 25. Our top 5, though, is unchanged still. Oklahoma State still on top. Boise in second. Vatech is third. LSU is fourth, and Northern Illinois rounds out at 5. I assume you don't have much to say here.
Nope, these 5 have been consistently the best 5, and they have been ranked for the longest time, but still pretty good for them.
We'll take a look at our next 5 up. Michigan remains 6, Stanford still 7. Georgia Tech and Oregon move up to 8 and 9 respectively, and 10. Illinois joins the top 10 for the first time this year. They got a big date against the Michigan Wolverines coming up this week. Anything you got to say about Illinois?
Not that much. I mean, Illinois, they do have themselves a very big game, which we're going to talk about very soon, but they got a lot to look forward to.
Uh-huh. Our next 5 up, number 11, is now TCU, jumping over the Baylor Bears, who are sitting at 12th. Notre Dame remains at 13. Number 14, now UConn, rocketing up after their win over Rutgers to move up to 7-0. And number 15 is now USC. Anyone here big?
Yeah, for me, the big one here is TCU. They are climbing up extremely fast, so expect them to be extremely good soon.
Let's head to our next 5. Number 16 is North Carolina. The Tar Heels slipped a lot after their loss to Florida State. They climb back up to 16. They were 17 last week. Number 17 is Indiana. Their loss this week to Ohio State dropped them down from number 8. 18, 19, 20 are unchanged. Southern Miss, Memphis, and New Mexico State, some of the best teams outside of the power conversation. Danny?
Yeah, for me, up here, the next best teams would probably... I do have myself a lot of hope for these non-Power 5 teams, so Southern Miss, Memphis, and New Mexico State.
I just saw in chat a fan of the channel, Jack on a Mac, mentioned imagine Ohio State being unranked. About that, number 21 is Florida State, 22 is still Nevada, 23 still Syracuse, and jumping to for the first time in the top 25 this year is Ohio State. Last year they had a rough year. They finished 5-7. They finished 5-7 on the regular season. They made an LA Bowl. They lost to Cullen Payton. They've managed to meet that 5-win mark in week 7 here, as now they're sitting at number 24. And number 25 is Tennessee. They returned to the rankings after dropping out due to their loss to number 3 Virginia Tech, if you remember that 2KU Saturday's game. But Tennessee is the first team to bounce out and back in to the top 25. Danny, what are your thoughts on these 5?
Yep, the big teams for me to look out for is Syracuse and Ohio State. Those two teams are looking extremely impressive. So don't be surprised if they start climbing up.
Mm-hmm. We'll take a look at our next few up. These are others receiving votes. Texas dropped out after their loss to Oklahoma State. FAU is 5-1. They're still on the outside, as is fellow Sunbelt member Coastal Carolina. Nebraska is 5-2. They were very close on the polls. Hawaii is also still on the outside looking in. Rutgers dropped out this week, much like Texas. Stephen F. Austin is 7-0. They are a big team above them, dropping away from slipping into the top 25. Miami, Ohio is still 6-0. Colorado 5-2, in a similar boat to Nebraska. Georgia is 6-1. They are joined by Arizona State as power teams with one loss, and Oklahoma as well. Some chaos happens above them. They're shoo-ins to be ranked, definitely. Danny, who's the big team here?
For me, I think it's got to be Stephen F. Austin. They have been pounding all their opponents, so it's good to see them still receiving votes.
Mm-hmm. We're going to move on here to our players of the week. Right now, the big winner, of course, being of UCF, Jack Gomez. He was 35 for 48, 490 yards, and 6 touchdowns. If you're a quarterback, you almost throw 500 yards and you throw 6 TDs. No matter what, you're in conversation for this player of the week slot. Dwayne Stallings had 6 touchdowns of his own. He was 20 for 23 in a big game. Out west. Cameron Yates for Boise State was 23 for 36. He had 340 yards and 5 TDs. Eric Foster, the big defensive player of the week for Oklahoma State. He had 7 tackles, a TFL, 2 picks, and a 43-yard pick 6. I would also shout out Jermaine Brown of UConn. If you remember seeing that game last week, he had a pick 6 as well. Danny, what are your thoughts on these players?
Yeah, for these, it's quite surprising seeing these players because 3 of them are not even from Power 6 programs. So it really shows the quality of these programs. And UCF, they are roaring hot.
Mm-hmm. Jack Gomez, went from a volatile player to one of the more promising names in the Conference USA. We'll have to see how he develops moving forward. Here are our games to watch this week for Week 8. Michigan taking on Illinois. That's the top 10 matchup, as is Oregon, Stanford. LSU heading to Alabama, hoping to avoid an upset scare. Indiana will take on Notre Dame in another ranked matchup. North Carolina on the road against Clemson. UTSA and Idaho, watch out for that one in case New Mexico State slips. That'll have huge repercussions moving forward. Arizona State, if they want to be ranked, they'll have to get a win on the road against UCLA. Virginia Tech, Florida State, possible conference championship preview. We'll have to see there. And Southern Miss meets their first test, an SMU team who put 50-plus points on the Louisville Cardinals, who are expected to be a favorite in this conference. Danny, what's your game of the week?
There's several big games. I mean, like Michigan, Illinois is one of them. We got Oregon and Stanford. LSU, Alabama will determine who will win the West Division. Indiana, Notre Dame, that's always a promising one. Virginia Tech, Florida State, that's basically an ACC championship game already. So many big games for all these teams.
There are so many big games. It was so hard to pick one for game of the week. I ended up sorting it over, and I ended up picking Michigan, number 6 team in the country, heading over to Memorial Stadium to take on the Illinois Fighting Illini. 2 top 10 programs. An Illinois team who rocketed up the rankings this year, and a Michigan team who has kept the momentum going from years of success prior. Who's your pick in this game, Danny?
Yeah, for me, this game, it's got to be Michigan. This one's going to be a fun game for all these teams.
I'm picking Illinois to win big here. I think the Illini take the next step. This week is so loaded that we're doing 2 games this week. I did one before, but I didn't announce it formally. I just decided in the moment due to me being honest, making a mistake. But this one I'm gonna announce formally. This is Oregon Stanford. This game was game of the week from the moment we simmed this last year, only on the Discord. Or this is basically the equivalent of Alabama Georgia for the 2K universe. These two are always going to be competitive. Always going to be some of the best teams in their conference. Oregon will be busting out the whiteout on the road against the Stanford Cardinal. I have the Cardinal pulling off an upset at home, taking down the Ducks. Danny, what do you have?
I'm also picking Stanford to win this one. And Stanford, they have performed really well, and of course, Oregon has performed really well. But I know the home atmosphere is going to be rocking, it's going to be loud, and it's going to be very intense.
Yeah, we'll love to see that. And that will do it for us here today. Thank you all for watching today's episode of 2K Weekly. Don't forget to tune in on the 22nd for a back-to-back showing of games. We'll be showing the Michigan-Illinois thumbnail first. So keep an eye out for this on the channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to join the TaipeiJoey101 Discord in the description for updates live as they happen, as well as the 2KU Tumblr. Don't forget to follow that for more stuff outside of college football. Thank you all for watching, and we will see you next week.